Buenas tardes a todos. Bienvenidos de nuevo a En Primera Persona. Como ya muchos sabéis, es un ciclo de entrevistas que organizamos en Iberacademy para primero mantener la inspiración y compartir música con algunos de los grandes maestros de la música clásica, y tenemos una suerte enorme. Hemos visto ya dos personas extraordinarias. Hoy tenemos a un tercer invitado maravilloso, que es Ian Bostridge. Este ciclo lo organiza Iberacademy. Somos una institución, un programa musical que se dedica pues, a dar apoyo y soporte al talento musical joven en Colombia y en Latinoamérica. Y este proyecto es una idea, un bebé del maestro Alejandro Posada, que por cierto hoy tiene cumpleaños. Le quería desear muy buen cumpleaños. Y bueno, pues yo también me añadí como director artístico. To everybody else, hello here from Iberacademy. I would just like to say welcome to everybody to En Primera Persona. Lots of you know already, this is a cycle of interviews that we're having and hosting with amazing personalities of the music world. And I'm so thrilled to have today someone who I've admired for so long, a friend and a musical partner. And what can I say? British singer, world-renowned tenor, writer. You do everything. Ian Bostridge, hi.
Hi, nice to be here.
It's so nice that you're joining us. Thank you for taking the time. It's really essential for us to have this inspiration. Thank you. The first question, I'm always asking the same one. How are you coping with these strange times? Is it negative or positive for you?
I'm afraid to say I find it negative. I think I am. We were talking about workaholism before, and I think I find it difficult not performing and not putting it out there. Really, I really miss it. I mean, I can't make music on my own really because I'm a singer, and I don't play the piano, so it's challenging. I mean, I've got lots of other things to do, and I need to get on with those. But it's one of those weird times where the days go really quickly, and it's a funny time.
Yeah, it is. I mean, to say the very least. Have you learned something new about yourself? Or
a couple of courses at the Britten Peers School in Snape. And then by the time I finished that job and I got a sort of a 3-year position back in Oxford, by the time I did that, I'd got myself an agent. So then I started running the two things in parallel. And it was because being a research fellow in an Oxford College is a very free activity. There's nothing particularly that you have to do. Yes. I could very, very gradually make the decision to become a singer. So it wasn't a sort of scary leap into the unknown.
Yes, well, I mean, that's nice that the music offered a new door, and that's what matters. For many of our students, music was also let's say, creeped in unexpectedly into their lives, and it started actually taking over in a way which just changed their lives completely. So it's nice to see that it happens. Not only just in in our context of Latin American, but rather to everybody. Yeah. It could just happen. Do you feel that having had that career before already, or that knowledge and the history and the philosophy, do you feel that this has had an influence on the way your own musical journey has gone? Do you feel that other musicians lack this sort of knowledge, or that it makes them, let's say, less prepared or less wise?
I don't feel I'm particularly wise, but for me myself, other parallel things feed your imagination, and they feed your relationship to the music, and they give you a sense of what it's all about, rather than focusing on either the technical business of singing, which in the end you do have to do. And it's interesting, one of the things you were asking about what I've been doing during the lockdown, and I have actually been working on my voice in a way that I haven't for quite a while, and trying to look at opening up new avenues vocally. And you do have to, in the end, you do have to grapple with the technicalities, even if they're sometimes seem a bit I don't know, undignified or boring. You can't just sing. It doesn't come out just.
No, absolutely.
But it does more than it does. I mean, the thing is, as a violinist or a pianist, you know very well that from the very start you have to be, you're learning to do something that's essentially unnatural, or certainly not. It's not something you're born with the capacity to do. Whereas, of course, we're all, 99% of us are born with the capacity to sing. So it's, So I think it's helpful to have other things feeding into it, and also other things than standard musicology, which can be pretty. It's just pretty narrow and formalist, I think, and I think it's good. Yes. It's good to get things from around and outside rather than just analysis.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that's also, I think, what makes you is a distinctive feature of what you do. There's a lot of intelligent things going on in the music making and the programming and so on. And I'll be asking you a bit about that. Now, there's one thing that has popped up quite a lot in the questions that our students have sent us, and that is the area of the relationship between music and text. In the instrumental world, we keep trying to find a vision or a meaning behind the pure musical material, and sometimes there is a program, but most often there's not. It's just this connection is purely abstract and has to do with understanding rather the composer's philosophy and aesthetics. Now, when it comes to singing, the text has an obviously clear relevance and it sets priorities differently. How do you see this relationship between music and text?
I think it's super complicated because I think it's not really the simplistic idea that the text is set to music, and that in that sense the music illustrates the text or is faithful to the text. Very often that can lead to if there's too much of that, it can lead to a sort of something a bit run of the mill, a bit prosy, or I mean, I often think of that there's a rather wonderful British composer called Gerald Finzi, who wrote a lot of songs. And sometimes he's so almost intimidated by the poetry. He's so in love with it. He so wants to make the rhythms always completely right, that it doesn't lift off the page. It isn't. And I always think of the metaphor I use is a sort of body snatching, that Schubert would take a poem. It could be a bad poem or a good poem, but he'd read the poem, get the idea, and then sort of eviscerate the poem and turn it into music. And I think it's also really important with a song that it's not just the pitched notes, the notes that are written down on the line. It's all the things in between, and it's also all the consonantal sounds which come out of the words. And even if you don't understand the words, the song can convey an awful lot to you. And when I first got to know German song, I didn't really understand German, but I was immediately seized by it because of the sort of sound of it, the intensity of it, and the sound of it, the voiced and unvoiced sounds. Yeah.
I mean, I find it fascinating. I was going over some scores today because we had this interview, and of course one of the things I went over again was Britain's Serenade, and the dirge, which is my absolutely favorite movement there. It just came to my mind that it's kind of variations around a lament, like the orchestra is not just supporting this kind of mantra that the voice is singing, but rather illustrating it, sometimes going against it, sometimes really supporting what it says, sometimes just commenting on it, but also it moves around, and the text just keeps almost unchained, like a mantra. I thought what a wonderful way that Britain found in order just to get out of what you just said, just being just faithful, and sometimes it feels as if the orchestra should be hitting or punching this singer in a trance almost. It's really amazing in a way.
Yes. And I think you're right that sometimes the music goes directly against the text. It's not sort of being faithful to the text. It's sort of confronting the text or contradicting the text. All those sorts of things.
Yeah. You have an incredibly wide repertoire of song, opera, concert, everything possible. You've done it and probably recorded it as well. Many of the works you perform are also extremely complicated. And how this is also another thing that I ask everybody because it's very personal. How do you face the challenge of learning a new piece? Do you have a methodic process, or is every piece differently for you?
It's always just sort of a question of sitting at the piano with. I don't play the piano, unfortunately, so I sit at the piano and play through my line with one finger, like an idiot. And if there is a recording of it, which very often there is nowadays, and recordings, it used to be when I first started singing, it was terrible. I'd have to sort of go out to the HMV store on Oxford street in London and try and work out whether there was anywhere a copy of a recording, however bad, of the piece I was about to sing, because I'd want to hear the accompaniment or the orchestral playing. And I suppose what I try to do is then play the notes with my one finger to obscure the other singer, so I don't hear the other singer. I mean, and then it's a very gradual sort of osmotic process of I'm not quick, I would say. But,
do you have perfect pitch?
No.
It's funny because I've encountered many brilliant singers who deal with all sorts of difficult contemporary pieces, and none of them have a perfect pitch, which makes the work all the more valuable and amazing, impressive. So it just must take time for it to sink in, basically.
Yes, and I think I don't do a lot of contemporary music, but the contemporary music I have done, the music has really come alive when it's moved beyond pitching the notes. And I think if you're very, very quick, and if you're a sort of one of these people who is in a choir and learnt, like an Oxford or Cambridge choir, and learnt to sight read incredibly well and have perfect pitch, then it's very easy to pick the notes out. And there are specialists in that. And as a result, contemporary music can often sound a bit samey. What you really need to do is absorb the notes and turn everything into a melody, even if it's not a melody. I mean, it's not true of all music. There's certain sorts of avant-garde music from the 1960s that, melody is definitely not what they're about. But Ben Henser wrote a song cycle for me and Julius Drake ages ago, and it was really a question of learning the notes well enough so that everything turned into tunes, however weird it was to begin with. That's something that I keep saying, that musicians in general, whenever they have a contemporary score in front of them, they somehow become very unmusical because it's just notes and pitches, but there's not the same research or the same goal. Nobody aims to make music out of it, and then it's actually all the more difficult to actually produce a result which is convincing also for an audience to actually love or at least be interested in a contemporary piece of music, right? Yeah, I suppose that the danger is that we're all so predominantly immersed in the sort of Austro-German tradition that we tend to think in terms of tension and release. And I suppose not all music is about tension and release. So it's finding the logic of different sorts of. I'm learning a piece by. I've already done part of it. There's an amazing piece by Satie called Socrates, and the longest section is the death of Socrates, which I've already done, and there are a couple of other movements, and it's all about stasis really, and that's quite difficult to recast your mind into and to bring off, because we're it's a bit like being locked in for coronavirus. We should be still.
That's what one must do. Now I'm going to read you a quote that I found, and I'm very sure this was written by a string player, but I do understand at least half the motivation. It says, Lieder or art song are the string quartets of vocal music. Now, I guess that's just because, in a way, it seems to be the composer's end of a circle. In a way, the highest musical refinement crystallizes into simplicity and pure musical expression. But do you believe that art song is the sublimation of classical music for, at least in the vocal department?
I think so, because there's no distractions, and some of the most intense and sort of profound thinking goes into this tiny little space, 3 to 5 minutes, sometimes a little bit longer, and it seems to be able to conjure up something quite cosmic, but without all the sort of bells and whistles that you get if you've got a sort of Mahler symphony. I've just reviewed a book about Mahler 8, which I didn't know well, so I listened to Mahler 8 again, and Mahler 8 is amazing, but it's there's such a it's really, really pull out all the stops, as a symphony of 1,000. And you don't. And I actually think Mahler's songs are probably more effective as roots to the human heart, than that.
Yeah. Well, proportion is. I always have the feeling, and we will speak about Schubert just in a minute, but in Schubert's case, for example, whenever I play his symphonic works, his chamber music works, especially the latest ones, I always have the feeling that he has a problem with longer structures. He fights, and one actually feels this fight and this unhappiness for not being able just to create these longer lines that Beethoven would have been able to do just in a second. And instead he's able just to do these little frame pictures, these tiny miniatures, but which evoke so much more than maybe the last movement of his great symphony, which I find, for example, a pain to put together and to conduct and keep alive.
Yeah, but it's funny because on the other hand, I associate Schubert with sort of length, with like the piano sonatas and these incredibly spacious sort of never-ending sort of quasi melodies. But you're right, it's not structured in the same way as it's not Beethovenian. It's not structured in a Beethovenian way, is it? So,
Vilde Frank, I just read this some time ago, and I thought it was funny. She said about Schubert, because this is our next topic, Schubert can be 5 years old in one phrase and 75 in the next, or both ages in the same phrase. I found it beautiful because in a way it's true. I mean, there's so much naivete, and yet in the same time he shows to the world that being 30 years old, he's understood more than but all of us will ever. No. You wrote a book called Winterreise, Anatomy of an Obsession. You've extensively studied the work, performed it more than 100 times, right? What motivated you to take, just to take that to the next level, not just perform, not just study, but leave something written for posterity about it?
I mean, in very to be really cynical, I needed to write a book, and I had to find something to write a book about, and it seemed the obvious thing. But no, I mean, and it's just full of, I don't know what it suggests as a piece, that sort of exploration. I wouldn't be able to write a book like that about, Die Schöne Müllerin or Dichterliebe. It's sort of got a sort of metaphysical element to it, and it invites unpicking things. I mean, because what I do in the book is to unpick a lot of the historical, scientific, philosophical details that underlie elements of the music and the poetry. And people do experience Winterreise as this very sort of amazing, sort of cosmic, profound, sublime thing. It's a sublime piece of work, and I suppose to try and we'll always be trying to engage with it in different ways. I mean, I've engaged with it in so many ways. I've done the Hans Zender strange orchestration, which is called a composed interpretation. I've done that in concert. I've done it fully staged as an opera, as it were, a one-man opera. I've done another staging of it with a wonderful film director, Roberto Andot. I've written about it. I've done it in concert. There are so many ways of approaching it. I've made a film of it.
It's a life companion in a way, right? Yet, I mean, it is such an iconic work. It's for many almost like a musical citadel in a way. It just stays there, and surrounded by very high walls and very inaccessible. Yet many interpretations that I've heard of this piece seem to just be an exercise of singing muscle. Do you think that through unveiling some of its secrets and features and trades, you are helping Winterreise to be performed in a more, at least, informed way?
I hope so. I mean, I think there's a myth about singing, a very prevalent myth, that it should be natural, and that anything that isn't that is too engaged in understanding and interpreting the music is somehow artificial and mannered. And I mean, my view is that all singing is mannered, and it just depends where you're coming from. I mean, there's this very funny thing where I think when folk singers listen to Benjamin Britten's realizations of English folk songs, they say, "My God, how mannered." And then you listen to folk songs, and they all sing in exactly the same sort of twangy voice, and it's great, but that is just as much mannerism and artificiality. All forms of singing are. No one sings like a bird except a child, really. I mean, one of the most beautiful things in my life was but my children singing just naturally when they woke up in the morning, and that's not mediated. But I think all other singing is mediated, really, and it's just whether you feel it's right or not, I suppose. I mean, listen to, who's for me the greatest jazz singer, Billie Holiday, and it's incredibly. She does really weird things, twisting the words and twisting all sorts of things.
Oh yeah, but that's probably also part of the charm, I guess. Of course. Now I was seeing an interview about Winterreise that you gave, and you said something about the fact that the narrative of the piece is broken up because of the way the poems were set. And you say, so we can project our own feelings, concerns, and obsessions onto the piece, which is wonderful, because I don't think every piece opens up itself or something like that. Now, it seems as if you're saying that the artist is permanently looking into a musical mirror in a way. Is this the ultimate challenge, to perform such a cycle which can tell as much about Schubert as it can tell as much about yourself?
Yeah, I mean, you have a sort of, I think there's a balance. I mean, the fact that a composer wrote it and wrote specific notes on a page and blah, 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 introduces a sort of discipline. So you can't just do whatever you want. But I think you can do much more with it than people often think you can, because actually there's very little on the page. I mean, I remember going to look at the manuscript in New York in the Morgan Library, and it's just amazing that there's this paper and there he's written on it, and there's not much on the page. It's something Britten said as well, but there's so much that you can do with what's there. But of course that requires you to imaginatively engage, because he doesn't tell you everything. He opens up a space for you to do your own thing.
Yeah, someone who was in the music business at some point, someone I met on a plane, and he was a businessman but very open for music. He used to say that, he said, my biggest admiration of a good artist is how they can take something which is dead on a piece of paper and humanize it. And I found the expression was wonderful, because it's true. It's through our own human feelings that we make something out of just paper, which is astonishing.
And the danger with a piece like Winterreise is, because it's huge and sublime and sort of sacred monster, that we treat it with kid gloves and don't realize how human it is, and don't realize how much we can do with it and how much we can push it in certain directions. And it doesn't matter. I remember, I think Elizabeth Schwarzkopf got very agitated by modern, Elizabeth Schwarzkopf, the great German operatic soprano, she got very agitated by modern opera productions. And she said it was like taking a knife to the Mona Lisa. But of course it's not, because there'll be another production 6 months later, and you should play with these things.
Yes, absolutely. I understand. Now, talking about opera, and you already mentioned a bit of this, you've done a lot of different things to the Winterreise, almost to the point that I started thinking this could be like a one-man opera in a way. No, it's now. I'm sure that every of those things, either be the tender or the tender with staging, the dramatizations that you've done, do you have a favorite, or can you think of a really special one, something that either changed your mind about the way you were doing the Winterreise, or something that was really where you said, this is exactly the way that I can imagine it?
1997 was the bicentenary of the birth of Schubert. And so we got the opportunity to do something which wouldn't really happen now, because we did it in an incredibly lavish way. We filmed the cycle. We were going to film it in a disused mental hospital in North London, which tells you something about the imagination of the director. But we went to a film studio, and we built a huge mock-up of one of the rooms, and also a white space. And it was a real proper movie. In fact, I think we did it on film and not on video. And the process of putting that together was one that was sort of full of resistance, because the director was a director called David Alden, who was a famous radical director in the 80s, I suppose. He's still doing lots of good work, but he wanted to make the piece incredibly expressionistic and exaggerated and angular, and I think at that stage in 1997, both me and my colleague Julius Drake, we found that difficult to take, and we were quite resistant to it. But what I found after doing it like that is it hadn't actually, over the subsequent 23 years, it's had an enormous influence on the way I do the piece. So so thank you, David.
No, that's true. I mean, hardly ever one has the only solution to how a piece is done, especially in such a cycle. And yeah, it's true. I mean, thank you, David. That's just how it goes. Now, I've always found that Schubert is like how could I say this? A master of subtle contradictions in a way. I find some of its most painful music takes place in major mode. Sometimes his music goes exactly against what the text or even the program might be saying. And in general, I don't know whether he was conscious, but he had this extraordinary ability to blur the lines between what black and white can be, and there's a lot of gray, which is very, very special. So I guess that also plays very much into the way you can create your character for the night with Winterfest, with Winterreise, I guess, no?
Yeah, absolutely. But I think also strong. He's a master of strong contrast as well. I mean, the way he builds a cycle is out of contrast between the songs. I mean, at the beginning you've got motivic links between the songs for the first handful, but by the time you get to the second half, that's disappeared. But you do get this very strong sense that he wants, short, fast song to punctuate long, slow song, and yeah.
Interesting. Many people have asked this. I'm sorry for it, but because I know it might be a bit difficult just to extrapolate, but are there any features of the Winterreise or Schubert's vocal music in general that you would be able to extrapolate to the rest of his works, or the way that one could interpret Schubert? Or just to make it simple, any advice of how our students can approach Schubert?
Oh golly. I just think live it. It's music. It's very expressive music. It's not. I mean, I've worked with musicians who have a very classical temperament, and there's room for that in Schubert. But I think he may be writing music in a classical tradition, but he's a romantic in his head. He's living in a romantic period, an early romantic period, and it's very important to see it in that way. I think it's extreme, and it's full of extremes of emotion, which we should let go, let them happen. Yeah.
Absolutely. You have this great relationship with Schubert, but there's also many other composers. And for example, I didn't know, I saw this the last days that you've also recorded Ottmar Schoeck, and I know that you do many other song composers. Who do you find yourself at home with? Who is a challenge? Who haven't you been able to warm up to in the song world?
I find the central figures, all of them, incredibly compelling. I mean, Schumann, Brahms, Mahler, and I'm trying to think of ones that I haven't. If there are any I haven't really. Ottmar Schoeck was a challenge because it's quite. I did a huge recording project and they were quite samey. I mean, you might want 2 or 3 Ottmar Schoeck songs, but you wouldn't necessarily want a whole evening of them. Which is also true if you look at the French tradition of, Fauré is a fantastic genius composer. But to do I quite like single composer recitals. I'd like to do a whole recital of Schubert or a whole recital of Schumann, a whole recital of Brahms, of Mahler. You couldn't do a whole recital of Fauré because it's somehow just the emotional arc doesn't work, I think.
Yeah, that's something that I'm very interested personally in. When I see your programs, of course, there's programs which are just monographic, but many times your recital programs present combinations of works, and I love those programs which have an idea behind, not just simply a collection of whatever is good for the singer. How do you approach programming Lieder Abend, and what is it that you want to achieve, or what kind of journeys do you like to take your audiences onto?
I think that the key one for me has always been compiling, going back to Schubert recitals out of individual songs. You do want to take you want to take the audience on a journey, and I suppose you want to take them. You want to maybe gather together groups of individual poets, and you want to gather together groups about subject. But in the end, there's a sort of, what takes over is a sort of musical logic, which you want in a song recital to have, in each half of the song recital to have an arc where nobody draws breath, where everybody is on the edge of their seat, from song to song to song to song. So you do go on a journey. And what's frustrating for me in the traditional song recital is a sort of sing a song, stop, sing a song, stop. So this sort of, as if you're just presenting a series of stamps in a stamp album, rather than, as you say, a journey. And with the sorts of recitals where you've got groups of songs by different composers, I suppose then it's more discrete. But within each group, you want to have that same thing of not drawing breath, I think. Nobody ever
used to do. Oh no, so sorry. Go ahead.
No, I mean, nobody looking at nobody's. Yeah. I mean, cough. You can tell when people are bored. I mean, there's a huge thing in classical music world and lots of anxiety about coughing, and it reminds me that I dreamt about Andras Schiff last night, which was very strange. But,
he's not nice when people cough. No.
Yeah, but people often cough when they're bored, because they're not really engaged. So it's quite a good discipline to think about that, I think.
I don't know if you had any concerts right before the whole world shut down because of coronavirus, but I did a concert in March 11th in London, and it's the only concert I've conducted in my life where the audience did not once cough, because of course at that time everybody was already paranoid about infecting each other.
Yeah.
Crazy. Now, one thing that I find very interesting is the whole concert experience when it comes to just the performance. Now, Stephen Easterly said something, and I read this to him, and he said, "Oh wow, that's a nice quote about himself." He said, "Music is not about performance. Performance is about music." Mm-hmm. Now, for some artists, performance is just a necessary evil in a way. Others live for it. Which one of them do you identify yourself with?
Performance is definitely the thing. I mean, everything. I'm a singer, not a musician, and everything is sort of is in one sense theatre, but that shouldn't be not theatre in a bad, not theatrical, but everything is about being on the stage and drawing the audience in, I think. And it's funny when you do things that don't involve that, like making CDs, and whether there's a tension in making recordings. There's a tension between trying to present something as dramatic and as engaging as what you do in a song recital, but then trying to produce something that can be repeated over and over and over again. Because what happens in a concert is that you'll do things that people will live with in the moment, but you wouldn't necessarily want to have repeated again and again. And that's one of the curses of recording, is that it makes people less daring, I suppose. But I'm definitely on the performance side, and not the sort of Glenn Gould hide yourself away and
yes. You're wonderful. You just take me to my next point without me telling you. This is you're just ideal. There's a question by one of our students saying there are artists who record until every note is perfect. Others who tend to favor those takes, which, although not so perfect, express the most. What kind from those two are you?
Although I live and die by performance, I'm actually, with recordings, I've always been very perfectionist. I've worked with a producer over a long number of years, and we're sort of polishing the thing, stringing. He talks about stringing pearls together. You know what the basic shape is, but you want to make sure everything works and can be listened to, 10 times. And what I'm amazed by is when I hear singers like, not singers like, when I hear my great hero Fischer Dieskau sing a recital live, and it could be a recording with 976 edits in it because he doesn't do anything wrong.
Yeah, crazy. Is the preparation for a recording different than for a concert in your case? I
haven't done much recording of things I haven't done in concert, so I don't really know.
No, but even if you've done them before in concert, do you? Because, for example, the other day, Lisa Bateshvili was there, and she was saying that when she has a recording, she immediately gets into a new, let's say, state of mind where she analyzes more what's going on, and goes really over every little thing that she might not have thought or left out to the performance. But you know.
No, I think I work more. I think it's probably more similar to. I mean, I work on instinct because I'm not really. In terms of music, I'm not a very analytical person. I mean, I'm a very analytical person in every other way, but not in terms of the notes on the page. Yeah.
Interesting. Yeah. Now, you have recorded really so many things and so much repertoire which has become iconic. Now, what's the idea behind a recording for Ian Bostridge? What is it that you want to do? Is it just a snapshot from the moment, what you think about Winterreise today, or is it is there a, how do you say, a motivation? Why putting programs together? Why those cycles? What motivates you to record?
I think they're just works that I love, and I want to, give my version of them. But I don't know if I think they're more than a. I mean, they obviously are a snapshot because you change so much over the years. But they're also they're always going to be a collaboration. So there's always going to be that thing that changes. So I've recorded Winterreise three times essentially. I mean, once for the film with Julius, once with Leif Ove Ansnes, and once with Tom Adès, and they were incredibly different experiences. And that came from the different. I mean, it came from me being older and having performed the piece a lot, but it also came from a different conception coming out of the pianist. And I mean, I wanted to record. I was very pleased to record the Winterreise with Tom, which was done from concerts, because we'd done Winterreise such a lot together. We'd done a tour in America and a tour in Europe, and it just seemed it would be a nice thing to memorialize it in some way, so that it would be there for the future. But the other thing now is that there is so much is there for the future anyway, because we're being recorded all the time. And I mean, I've had colleagues who've, got really anxious about, said, oh, I don't want to sing when it's being recorded. But we essentially everything gets recorded now. And I mean, you get people in the auditorium with phones, and so you can't be too choosy or picky about what's going on. It's nice to have a situation where you are in control though.
Yes, of course. Now, Winterreise is not the only piece that you've recorded several times. Britain War Requiem, Britain Serenade, Illuminations. Am I right?
Yeah.
And what apart from the collaboration, for example, in Winterreise is very clear having such different partners like Leif Ove and Julius and Tom. What takes you to record other pieces several times? And also, have you ever sat down, compared recordings, and realized, oh God, this was really similar, or the opposite? How could I sing so differently?
I haven't. I never go back and listen to old stuff.
Good, no, it's fine too. I don't really. I'm a bit lost now. No, that's all right too. No, it's we can go to the next. That's no problem. You've spoken about collaborations, and that's in a singer's life, as you were saying, that's essential, because most of the time you need either an orchestra conductor, a pianist, a chamber group. You've spent a great deal of time working with pianists, and in a way, it seems from outside, for the non-singers, that the relationship between pianist and singer is a special amount of symbiosis. Now, do you think it's unfair that some of those great pianists are a bit in the shadow of great singers? Because I acknowledge this happens quite a lot when it comes to a certain area of the repertoire.
Yeah, I mean, the concerts are tend to be sold on the back of the singer's name, unless the pianist is a famous pianist who actually quite often may not be as experienced at playing the song repertoire, may not know the song repertoire as well. I mean, and they'll often bring something special, but there is a general sort of recognized problem with people not giving enough significance to the pianist, really, because I mean, that's the root of the music. And also you want to encourage people to listen to the whole thing. I mean, and when you consider that, people talk about Schubert as being the sort of first great lieder composer. And that doesn't mean there wasn't song before Schubert, because there's been song since cavemen and cavewomen. But what we understand with Schubert is that he was the first composer extensively to compose with the resources of the modern piano. It wasn't absolutely the modern piano, but it was getting that way. And that offered a whole new range of color and sort of harmonic density and the ability to create something extraordinary out of that. And the idea that we should think that singing songs with piano in the Wigmore Hall is just about the singer is a bit ridiculous.
Yeah, no, I've always found it interesting, because there is so much trust between singers and pianists, and I've seen the way that you guys work is so much a chamber music symbiosis, and also the part of the pianist when it comes to accompanying is an extraordinary game of juggling functions and colors and so on, which I find just very fascinating in a way.
Yeah.
Now, what about conductors? You also spend a lot of time working with conductors.
I say one thing more about pianists. I mean,
yes,
because the other thing is that because there's one of the dangers of modern. I mean, it's always been a danger, but I think it's accelerated. One of the dangers of classical music is louder, faster, higher, and that's a danger with the piano. And because pianists who specialize in the Lied repertoire are not necessarily going to be playing, I don't know, the most difficult pieces of Liszt ever.
Rachmaninoff or something.
Yeah, that doesn't mean that they're not actually much greater musicians than some of the people who are playing that stuff, but they can't play as fast and loud and whatever. So yeah.
Absolutely. Now, what is your conception of an ideal partnership between a vocal soloist, you, and a conductor?
Total subservience on the part of the conductor.
It's great for me to know, since we have some concerts coming up.
I don't know. I remember people used to say about Bernard Haitink that the thing that was really great about him, and the thing that is very difficult for a conductor, is to be an accompanist, to be in control enough of the orchestra as your instrument, I suppose, then to be able to mold yourself around. It's funny with I think because of the operatic tradition. I remember talking to Leif Ulver about this. The difference between doing vocal works with a conductor and doing piano works. When Leif Ulver was doing a piano concerto with the conductor wouldn't really say very much, or wouldn't necessarily interfere that much. Or whereas I think there's quite a strong tradition in vocal music of conductors being very interventionist, because they're used to being in opera houses where you've got, I don't know, 6 people in a vocal coach, a language coach, the conductor, the assistant, and they're all rushing around the singer with a book with notes and saying, you should do this, you should do this, you should do this, you should do this, as if they're idiots. So that has been. So I find that less now, and I found a sort of change in when I first started working as a singer. I used to get a stomachache every time I went to work with a new conductor, because they used to terrify me, and I didn't know if they'd think I was good enough, and they could be. I mentioned Charles Mackerras. I mean, he was an amazing conductor, and I really liked him, but he could be a terrible bully. So, but now I suddenly wake up without not quite knowing how, and I'm 55, and I've recorded a lot of music, and I'm working with conductors who've listened to my recordings and listened to me singing when they were 15. So it's a different dynamic, I suppose. Yeah.
Yes, I mean, that happens to me. I grew up listening to your recordings, then I got to do some pieces with you.
Yeah.
So yeah.
But I mean, there's always a good. I mean, it's a good exchange. I think that's what's needed. Yeah.
Yes. Yeah, I also think it's now that I'm conducting more and more, and I haven't got nearly as much experience as so many others with singers, but it is about taking care of them, and yet being able to also offer something, not just simply keeping the orchestra on 1,000 stories below, but rather just finding a way that the singer can navigate the music and always be comfortable, and that's quite essential. On the contrary, a question that came up. What's the worst a conductor can do to a singer on stage?
I won't say who. Well, yeah, if they don't understand, there are a lot of conductors who are wonderful musicians who don't actually know how to conduct in a technical way, especially if, for example, in the opera house, they don't understand. I mean, I don't know if there are lots of them, but I experienced working with one, but he didn't understand the time lag between, you know, if you're at the back of the stage in a large opera house and he's right, and things get slower and slower. That can be really painful. And then the worst thing they can do is drown you.
Yes, and there are some who are known for doing it on purpose, unfortunately. Now, some of the students have pointed out that you're a fan. You even mentioned this of other artists also, like Billie Holiday, Bob Dylan. You've done things with Brad Meldau. There's a vast array of people who obviously have an influence on what you do. Do you have mentors? Have you had people who've left a strong mark on you, on the way that you're as a musician?
I would say above all else, I wouldn't be a singer if it wasn't for Dietrich Fischer-Dieskau, because I just listened to him endlessly as a teenager. And then I was lucky enough to meet him, sing to him a bit, spend a bit of time with him. And as he got older, he was very sweet. But I always used to have this terrible, while he was still alive, I'd look into the audience and I'd see somebody and I'd imagine it was him. It never was, because he never came to one of my concerts. And I just thought, oh my God, because he would have hated what I knew he would hate what I did, because he'd find it too expressionistic and exaggerated, and there'd be all sorts of things. His aesthetic was, although for himself, I think he did do things that were very extreme and expressionist. I think he was always selling a line of bel canto and moderation and classicism and balance. So he's been a huge influence on me.
All right. Now, the future, that's the question. Do you still have dreams to fulfill? What are your future plans? That came up actually several times.
Well, I'm working on I'm working on my voice, and I think as you get older, your voice does change. But I remember I went to a teacher called Diane Folano a long time ago, and it was really inspiring. She said to me, your voice will go on developing, getting better until you're 50. And now I'm 55, so I think. But then I've been to somebody else recently, and he was saying, your voice will go on getting better until you're, at least 65, as long as you don't mishandle it. And what you have to be able to handle is the way it changes. So I mean, my voice has probably got bigger, and I have to learn how to negotiate that. And so that opens up the possibilities of doing other roles, of maybe doing some roles in a particular way. I mean, doing some Wagnerian roles not in a great big Wagnerian way, but with the right orchestra and in the right circumstances, because they don't have to be just belted, I think. And I'd love to. It's a German repertoire which I'd like to get involved with. Yeah, but there's also a huge amount of the thing is, there's so much early music to explore that I'll never get to the end of. I mean, cantatas of Handel and Scarlatti and all that sort of stuff is endlessly fascinating.
Absolutely. Now, after Brexit, coronavirus, political situation, seems that all of us are somehow, reevaluating the way that the music business operates, and especially the meaning of classical music, I guess. What do you think is the hardest challenge ahead that we have as, members of the classical music business? Is there a bright future for us?
There has to be a bright future, in the sense that people are going to go on wanting to experience music in this way. I mean, human nature is not going to change, but I think I don't know how it is in other countries, but I think maybe it's been better elsewhere than here. But here we've really freaked ourselves out, and it's difficult to see, even when the rules change, and people have been made very, very, very nervous about something we don't actually know very much about yet, and which may turn out to be worse than we expect. But when all the statistics are in, it may turn out that the death rate is lower than that of seasonal flu. It may be. I mean, I'm not saying it's going to be, but and then we will have worked ourselves up into this huge froth. And are we prepared to sacrifice I mean, obviously I'm self-interested, I work in classical music, but it's the whole of our civilization, the whole of our culture. Is that disposable? I don't know.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, the last question is always the same, just changes the name. It says, advice to a teenage Ian Bostridge, and to all of our students by definition. The first one is, what is the homework a young student must have done in order to just be prepared to learn and to get better? Not even just to succeed, but what are the, what's the ground that one must have in order just to start developing?
I think just to have as a singer, to have a wide culture, to read a lot and listen to a lot of music and listen to a lot of different sorts of music, and don't think there's only one way of doing it. And then as a result of that, you'll find your own voice, because the most important thing with singing, and probably with playing an instrument, is to find your own way of doing it, and then people will listen to you, and don't listen to the people who say, oh, you don't sound right, that's not the way you should do it. I mean, don't be arrogant, but I mean, you know that because you listen to different styles of playing, because we can hear those now in recordings, and people have played in so many different ways and sung in so many different ways. You just have to be convincing and committed.
Yeah. Many of our youngsters, they're concerned, and I think you're a great example, because they think that if they haven't reached a certain amount of success or a certain amount of development before they're 20 or 25, then they think their career is over. Yet here you are, you started when, like professionally when you were 27, decided to go full professionally when you were 30. What can you say to them, especially to those who are nailed by teachers and people in the market, to say, no, well, if you don't do it now, you'll never make it?
You just have to be patient, and also realize that there's plenty of time, especially true of singers, because singers develop late. But you look at, I hope it's still possible in the instrumental world as well. I mean, I look at what, Alfred Brendel's career, and his feeling that he sort of went slowly, and it only really became very big when he was 40 or something. But there are so many young people now sort of making big splash. It's difficult, because there's so much marketing and blah 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 goes into that, I think.
Yeah, the splash is something that I think everybody needs to be aware of, in a way, because splashing, you can splash big, but staying there, that's harder, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. The game is to the long term, not to the swift somehow.
Exactly. That is very relevant. Ian, you're such a love for doing this for us. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much.
Really. Now, I'll just do a little announcement that we're done. Thank you, everybody. Next appointment is on Tuesday, 5th of May, 10 a.m. Colombian time, 4 p.m. UK time, 5 p.m. European time. Sir Antonio Papano, who's a good friend, both of Ian and I, we've actually done even a record together, Britain War Requiem. It's going to be quite thrilling. Para todos los que nos quieran seguir todavía la próxima vez, el 5 de mayo, el martes próximo, 10 de la mañana en Colombia, 4 de la tarde en Reino Unido y 5 de la tarde en hora europea. Antonio Papano, el gran director de ópera y sinfónico. No se olvide de seguirnos en Instagram, Facebook para todas las novedades. Don't forget to follow us Instagram, Facebook, so that you know what's going on. Ian, thank you so much. Lots of love.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Bye.
Bye, everybody.